Let's talk a little bit about valuation. How you value a business. How much is a business worth? How much is a company worth? Remember when you decided to go to law school because there was no math in law? Yeah, sorry, there is. But it's simple math, right? And we have calculators and we have spreadsheets, so you don't have to be good at math to understand the basic concepts of finance and valuation. So, how much is any asset worth? And we're talking about some sort of money-producing asset. We're not talking about a famous painting. How much will you pay for a famous painting? That depends on how much money you have and how much you want that painting and how much someone else wants that painting. When we're talking about a money-producing asset, it will have an intrinsic value. The value of any money-producing asset is based on how much money it will produce for you and what type of rate of return you want. You understand this, and let me just show you that you really understand this, right? So, as I said, value of an asset, the value of a company, the value of a business is based on how much cash the asset will produce and what is the rate of return you want. Okay, here's an illustration. Imagine we have asset X. It's a company, it's a business, whatever it is, it's asset X. And we predict that it will produce $1,200 in cash. Right? I want a rate of return of 20%. Okay? How much will I buy this asset for? And that will be the value of the asset. Well, the value of the asset will be $1,000. Here's the idea. If I buy this company for $1,000 and it then produces $1,200 in cash, I have made my 20%. That's what I wanted to make in this investment. So that's all you need to know. How much cash will the asset produce and what rate of return will you want? Now, naturally, courses on finance will spend oodles of time discussing these two issues, but we're lawyers. We're not going to value the company. We'll be involved in these negotiations and we'll see what happens, and we might have to draft clauses in contracts, but we don't have to value the company. But we have to know what our clients are talking about. When our clients are talking to their financial advisors and they're talking about valuing the company, we have to understand. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about this idea of present value and what is often called the discounted cash flow. All right, so to understand the idea of present value, here's my promise to you. In 1 year, I promise to pay you $1,200. 1 year from now, I promise to pay you $1,200. And we'll consider that an asset in a way, all right? You're going to receive $1,200 in a year. How much will you give me today? How much are you willing to invest today so that when you receive $1,200 in a year, you've made money. You've made the money that you want to make. How much money you want to make? You want to make a 20% annual return. And since we're dealing in 1 year time frame, we don't have to do any specific math or calculations. It'll be quite simple. And this is just the example we had before. The present value of that is $1,000, right? So if you invest $1,000 today, present value, to receive $1,200 from me in a year, you will have made an annual return of 20%. And that's what you wanted. You wanted an annual return of 20%. Okay? That's just what present value is. How much money you will invest today to receive a certain amount of money in the future. We could look at it in a different way. The present value of $1,200 for a year from now is $1,000. Let me say that again. $12,000 in a year from now, the present value of that is $1,000 today. That's the present value based on a 20% return. All right, there's the formula. It looks really complicated, right? It says PV equals FC divided by 1 plus rate with t as an exponent to the power of t. It's really not that hard once you learn how to plug in the numbers. So the present value, that's $1,000, and we don't know that yet. We know the future value, the future cash. FC is the future cash. We said future cash is $1,200. You're going to pay me $1,200 in a year from now. So then we do 1 plus whatever rate of return you want. And we said you wanted a 20% return on this investment. And so the rate of return is 0.20. Remember, 0.20 is 20%. So we do 1 plus 0.20, and then that t, that's just the time period. How many time periods? In this case, we said 1 year, and we're having a 20% annual return. And so that 1 is 1 year. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. So we plug in the numbers, and we do the math, and the present value is $1,000. Okay. Now, just change it a little bit to see how this changes the numbers. In 2 years, I promise to pay you $1,200. Same number, but 2 years is the changing variable here. How much will you give me today? Now, you want a 20% annual return. You don't want a 20% overall return. If it's just a 20% overall return, it'd still be $1,000. You want a 20% annual return. And when we're talking about annual return, we're talking about compounding interest. What is compounding interest? It means on the first year, I'm going to make interest on it. And on the second year, I'm going to make interest on the interest and the principal. So if I were to invest, I'll talk about that in a second. We'll get the idea of compounding interest. But compounding interest is that you're not only making interest on the principal, what you invest, but you're also making interest on the interest. Okay, so in 2 years, I promise to pay you $1,200. How much money will you give me today? Assuming you want to make 20% return each year compounded. Well, the present value in this case is $833. So if you give me $833 today, and in 2 years I pay you back $1,200, you have made a 20% annual return. Okay, so it's not just 20% total, it's 20% per year compounded. Right? How does our formula change? Well, that formula doesn't change. It's still present value equals future cash divided by 1 plus the rate over t. The t changes. That's the only thing that changes here. And the t is 2 years to the power of t. So let's look at it. The present value equals the same 1,200. That's the future cash, 1,200. Divided by 1 plus the rate. The rate didn't change. You wanted 20% per year compounded, 2 to the second power, right? Squared. That's what changes here. Before it was 1 because it was a 1-year period. Now it's 2 because it's a 2-year period. And you might say, why? Why do we do that? Doesn't matter. Just plug it in and you'll get the right answer. Okay, now, just to practice the concept, in 3 years, I promise to pay you $1,200. How much will you give me today so that you can make a 20% return each year compounded for 3 years instead of 2? Right? And the present value of that, you would give me $694 today. And if I paid you back $1,200 in 3 years, you would have made a return of 20% per year compounded. And what's the formula? Same formula. You see, the only thing that is changing is that to the power of t. So look at it. The present value equals $1,200. That's the future cash. Divided by 1 plus the rate. The rate is 0.20. That's 20% return to the third power cubed. Right? You get it? Every period where you're counting the interest, that's what goes in the t. right? And there are spreadsheets that do this. There are online calculators that do it. It's not really hard. The concept is quite easy. This is what we call present value. And it's called discounting cash flow because you're taking the future cash, in this case $1,200, and discounting it back to present value using that interest rate of 20%. All right, now let's talk about the present value of a company, because what we're really doing is trying to use discounted cash flow to value our company. Let's make these assumptions that we are thinking about buying this company, buying this business, and we make projections about the future cash flow of the company. The company is going to have cash coming in based on what profits it makes from its business and other things. So what is the cash flow the business is going to have each year for the next 5 years, right? So when we do discounted cash flow for a company, usually I see finance people doing about 5 years. They don't usually do 10. They don't usually do 6, 7. They don't usually do it for forever. They usually do it for about 5 years. So we try and predict the cash flow for the company for the next 5 years. And so I've just made these up. Let's just assume that we have looked at the company's books, we've looked at the market, we've looked at the business, and we say, you know what, we think this company over the next 5 years is going to make $180,000 each year for the next 5 years. Cash flow of $180,000 each year for the next 5 years. So the question is, if we assume that we're going to have this future cash flow over the next 5 years, how much are we willing to pay for the company today? All right, now there's one other thing we need to know. We need to know the terminal value of the company. And I'm just going to go with the liquidation value of the company, because this company is a company we're going to have either for the next 5 years and then we're going to sell it, in which case we have the termination value, or we're going to have it for the next 5 years and we are going to liquidate it, in which case we'll have a liquidation value, or we're going to have it for the next 5 years and then we're going to keep it and we're going to have the company forever. But we can't keep doing discounted cash flow forever, so we're always going to have some sort of termination value to help us determine the value of the company, the present value of the company. So these are our future cash flows. In 1 year, we're going to have $180,000 cash flow. In the second year, we're going to have another $180,000 in cash flow. 4, 5, same thing, $180,000 in cash flow each of those years. And then at the end of year 5, we're going to have another cash flow, right, a theoretical cash flow, the terminal value of the company. If we were to sell the company at the end of 5 years, this is what we would get. Or if we were to take the company and liquidate it, pay off all of its debts, we would be left with this. So we're just going to assume that the termination value of this company is $550,000. So what is the present value of this company? How much will we be willing to pay for this company? Well, let's assume, and you see I put it in there, I should put it in there a little bit more clear, but we want a 15% return. And you see the 15 is in there, in that the 0.15. Let's assume that we want a 15% return for our investment. And so what we'll do is we'll do a discounted cash flow for each of these future cash flows. So what is the present value of $180,000 1 year from now, assuming a 15% return? Well, the present value of that cash flow in a year is $156,522, assuming we want a 15% return. So in other words, if I invest $156,000 today and I want a 15% return, I'm going to be expecting $180,000 in the future. And we do that. We continue to do that for each cash flow. What are we changing in all of these formulas? Well, we're just changing the year, because this is year 2. And so if we look at our formula, we do this squared to the power of 2. 1 plus the rate to the power of 2 squared, and then we get our present value. So if I invest $136,000 today to receive a cash flow in 2 years, I expect that future cash flow to be $180,000. We do the same for year 3. We do the same for year 4. We do the same for year 5. We also have the terminal value, which is also after year 5. We discount that back to present value. And you see all those present values, then we add them up. So the present value of the company, assuming these cash flows in each of year 1 through 5, is about $876,000. So what's the value of the company? Assuming I want a 15% return, assuming we're going to have these cash flows each year for the next 5 years and a terminal value of $550,000, then the present value of this company is $876,000 and change. And that's just the starting point, right? The seller is going to come up with different numbers. The seller of the company is going to say, listen, those cash flows that you're expecting, no, the company is going to have much higher cash flows. And that rate of 15%, you should use 12%. And if you change those, then that number, $876,000, is going to be much higher. This just begins the negotiations with the seller. Okay, now you might have said, wow, that was really important, the rate of return. Once we said 20%, once we said 15%. How do I determine the rate of return I want to make? Well, courses on finance naturally spend lots of time on this topic. We don't have to spend lots of time on this topic. In our class, I will just give you the rate of return that you want. But what the finance people do is they actually try and find an investment that's equally risky. The rate of return really measures the risk of the return. So imagine you're going to lend money to someone who's a poor credit risk. You're going to charge a higher interest rate to compensate you for that risk. Imagine you're going to lend money to someone who's a very good credit risk. You're going to charge a lower interest rate because there's less risk. So the rate of return that you want is based on the risk of the investment. How do you determine how risky this asset is, how risky these cash flows are, how risky this business is? Well, there's no perfect method, but you look at it in comparison to other investments. And you say, ooh, investing in this company is as risky as making this investment. And therefore, I can see that this investment, I'll get a 10% return. So if I invest in this company, I want at least a 10% return. So what are some kind of baseline measures? Well, just think about it. If I invested in a 5-year CD, which is FDIC insured, which means it's almost risk-free, right? Because it's insured, I could get a 2.4% return. And so if my company is not a very risky company, it's almost a sure bet, then I really couldn't ask for more than a 2.4% return. And that's the rate of return that I would use when doing my discounted cash flow for the company. Now, the stock market is a little bit more risky. If I invested in a diversified investment in the stock market, I'd make somewhere between 7 and 10%. So if I'm making an investment in a company, and I think, investing in this company is about as equal as investing in the stock market, then I'd be looking for a 7 to 10% return. And that's the number I would use in my discounted cash flow. Now, that's a diversified investment in the stock market. Each company might be a little bit more risky. So a well-established company like GE or P&G, the return on that would be much lower than a far more risky company like Tesla or some other company that's a little bit more risky. The rate of return on that investment would be higher.